One beautiful spring day, a young girl named Alice sat by the river listening to her sister read aloud from a history book. But Alice wasn't really listening. She was playing with her cat, Dina, and daydreaming. The sun was bright and the air was warm. Soon, Alice began to close her eyes. She no longer heard her sister's voice. Suddenly, a large white rabbit dashed by. Alice jumped up. The rabbit was wearing a waistcoat and bow tie and was carrying a huge pocket watch. I'm late. I'm late for a very important date, the white rabbit muttered as he went along. Alice went chasing after him, but stopped short at a rabbit hole. The rabbit scuttled down the hole. Thinking he might be late for something fun, like a party, Alice followed him. Suddenly, she stumbled and fell head over heels into a hole. But instead of falling faster, she began falling slower and slower until she was floating. She landed gently, just in time to see the rabbit disappear through a tiny door. Alice was too big to follow him. The doorknob suggested she try the bottle on the table, which said, "Drink me." Alice drank and drank. With every sip, she got smaller and smaller. When she was ready to open the doorknob told her that he was locked. Then he suggested she try a biscuit from the box labeled, "Eat me." Alice did, and she began to grow. Soon she was crying giant tears. The doorknob told her to drink again. She grew smaller and smaller until she could float right through the keyhole. On the other side of the keyhole, Alice found she was in the strangest place. There were talking birds and walking fish and a Cheshire cat who kept appearing and disappearing. Alice kept hoping that one of these creatures could help her find the white rabbit, but they were no help at all. She came upon a pair of twins. They introduced themselves as Tweedledum and Tweedledee. "How do you do, Tweedledum and Tweedledee?" Alice greeted them. She could not tell them apart at all. "When first meeting someone, you should shake hands and state your name and business," said Tweedledum, grabbing Alice's hand and shaking it firmly. "That's manners," said Tweedledee, grabbing her other hand and giving it a good squeeze. With that, the twins danced Alice round and round, but they were so rough that they flipped her over, knocking her onto her back. Alice was not pleased. "Talk about manners," Alice exclaimed as she picked herself up. "If you must know, my name is Alice, and I'm following the white rabbit. I'm very sorry, but I must go." Despite the twins' protests, Alice went on her way. Soon she came to an unusual garden. Flying about were bread and butterflies and a rocking horsefly. Alice discovered that the flowers of Wonderland could speak. "What kind of flower are you?" a big orchid asked her. "Oh, I'm not any kind of flower," Alice replied. "Why, no fragrance at all," added another flower, sniffing her. Alice did not know what to make of this. "Just as I expected," a rose cried. "She's nothing but a common weed." The rose turned her back on Alice. "Leave," shouted the flowers. "We don't want you in our lovely garden." They pointed to the way out. Feeling very upset, Alice was forced to run away. Then, nearby, Alice saw a familiar grin up a tree. It was the Cheshire cat. She asked if he'd seen the white rabbit. "No," replied the cat. "But if I were looking for him, I'd ask the Mad Hatter." And with that, the cat began to disappear. Alice realized that the cat hadn't told her how to find the Mad Hatter. She walked along and saw 2 road signs pointing in the same direction. One read "Mad Hatter," and the other read "March Hare." She followed the signs to a clearing in the woods where the Mad Hatter was giving a tea party with the March Hare. They made Alice feel quite unwelcome. They refused to offer her a cup of tea and had no intention of helping her find the White Rabbit. Alice went on her way and soon ran into the Cheshire Cat again. She explained that she was trying to find her way home, but the cat replied that all ways led to the Queen. He opened the door and Alice stepped through. The White Rabbit hurried into view. He was about to announce the Queen. The Queen of Hearts appeared and invited Alice to play croquet. But during their game, the Cheshire Cat showed up and tripped Her Royal Majesty. The Queen was enraged and blamed Alice. "Off with her head!" she cried. There was a mad chase and Alice ran through Wonderland to get away. Suddenly, Alice awoke on the riverbank. "You've been dreaming," her sister said. Alice looked around but didn't see any strange talking creatures. All she saw were her sister, the old history book, and Dina, her cat. And that was just fine with Alice. Pongo, Perdita, and their 15 puppies lived in a cozy little house in London. The house belonged to their humans, Roger and Anita. They were perfectly happy until they met Cruella de Vil, Anita's old school friend who simply loved spotted puppies. She wanted to buy them all and make them into spotted fur coats. Roger put his foot down. "These puppies are not for sale, and that's final." Cruella was furious, but she refused to give up. One night, Cruella's two nasty henchmen, Horace and Jasper, kidnapped the puppies. Then they drove out to Cruella's old country estate and waited to hear from their boss. When the puppies got there, they saw lots and lots of other Dalmatian puppies who had also been snatched by Horace and Jasper. Back at home, Pongo and Perdita could not believe what had happened. Perdita knew at once that Cruella was behind her missing puppies. "She has stolen them," sobbed Perdita. "Oh, Pongo, do you think we'll ever find them?" Pongo knew that the twilight bark was their only hope. He would bark his message to the dogs in London. They would pick it up and pass it along to the dogs in the country. And maybe someone would find the puppies. That night, the twilight bark reached a quiet farm where an old English sheepdog known as Colonel lay, sleeping peacefully. "Alert! Alert!" shouted Sergeant Tibbs, a cat who lived on the farm. "Vital message coming in from London." The colonel listened closely. 15 puppies have been stolen," he cried. Sergeant Tibbs remembered hearing barking at the old de Vil place. They headed straight for the gloomy mansion. The colonel helped Tibbs look through the window. Sure enough, there were 15 puppies, plus their 84 new friends. Tibbs and the colonel overheard Cruella, Jasper, and Horace talking. When they heard her plans to make coats out of the puppies, they knew there was no time to waste. The colonel ran off to get word to Pongo and Perdita, while Tibbs helped the puppies escape. As soon as Horace and Jasper realized what was happening, they tried to stop the puppies, but it was too late. Pongo and Perdita arrived and fought off the foolish thugs as the puppies hurried to safety. Once all the dogs were safely out of the house, they thanked the colonel and Tibbs and went on their way. A black Labrador retriever arranged for them to ride to London back in the back of a removal van that was being repaired. The dogs waited in a blacksmith shop. Suddenly, Cruella's big car drove up the street. She had followed their tracks and was parked and waiting. But Pongo had a clever idea. There were ashes in the fireplace. If they all rolled in them, they would be disguised in black soot. Then they could get aboard the van without Cruella realizing it was them. And that's just what they did. It worked perfectly until a blob of snow dripped onto a puppy and washed off a patch of soot. From her car, Cruella could see it was a Dalmatian puppy. "They're escaping!" she cried as the van took off. There was a really scary chase. Cruella tried to pass the van on the road, but she ended up crashing through a barricade and driving right into a huge pile of snow. Cruella's beautiful car was a wreck. And that wasn't all. She had lost the puppies. Cruella threw a tantrum. Pongo and Perdita and 99 puppies arrived home safely, much to Roger and Anita's delight. Roger pulled out a handkerchief and wiped Pongo's face clean. "What will we do with all these puppies?" Anita asked. "We'll keep them," Roger answered. He sat down at the piano and composed a song right on the spot. "We'll buy a big place in the country, and we'll have a plantation," he sang. "A Dalmatian plantation." And that's exactly what they did. Lady was a happy little dog. She lived in a big house with Jim Deer and Darling. One day, Lady learned that Darling was expecting a baby. Lady didn't know that things in the house would soon be very different. One day, Lady met a scruffy dog named Tramp. Tramp had no home and no family. He went wherever he pleased and did whatever he pleased. "Believe me," Tramp told Lady and her friends, Jock and Trusty, "babies change everything. Now you'll have nothing but trouble. Just wait and see." But Tramp was wrong. When the baby arrived, Lady had one more wonderful person to care for and love. Several weeks later, Jim Deer and Darling went off on a trip. Aunt Sarah came to stay at the house. "Lady," said Jim Deer, "help Aunt Sarah take care of the baby." Aunt Sarah brought her Siamese cats with her. They made a lot of trouble. Lady barked at the cats, but it did no good. "Shame on you, Lady," shouted Aunt Sarah, "attacking my poor little angels. A muzzle is what you need." She took Lady right to the pet shop to buy one. The muzzle was more than Lady could bear. She had to run away. When Lady stopped to catch her breath, she was in a strange part of town surrounded by a pack of mean dogs. Just then, her friend Tramp appeared. Seeing that Lady was in danger, he fought the stray dogs and chased them off. "You poor kid," said Tramp, looking at the muzzle. He took Lady to the zoo, where a friendly beaver chewed right through the muzzle and freed Lady. Afterwards, Tramp took Lady to visit one of his favorite places. They shared a romantic dinner for two at Tony's Italian restaurant. Finally, after a lovely stroll through the park, Lady said, "I must go home. I promised Jim Deer I'd take care of the baby." "Okay, Pigeon," said Tramp, "but let's have some fun first." "Tramp, no," said Lady. But Tramp had already rushed into a nearby yard to chase the squawking chickens. Suddenly, the dog catcher appeared. Before she knew it, Lady was on her way to the pound without Tramp. Lady was ashamed and scared in the pound, especially when the other dogs began to tease her. A dog named Peg came to Lady's rescue. "Can't you see the poor kid's scared enough already?" Peg said to the other dogs. The dogs were jealous because Lady had a shiny license and would soon be going home. When Lady finally came home, Tramp said, "I'm sorry I got you into trouble, Pidge." But Lady was too angry to listen. She refused to speak to Tramp. Later that night, Lady saw a rat scurry up a vine to the baby's room. She barked as loudly as she could. When Tramp heard Lady barking, he came running. "What's wrong, Pidge?" he asked. When Lady told him about the rat, Tramp ran into the house and up the stairs. Lady pulled at her chain until it broke. Then she ran up to the baby's room to help Tramp fight the rat and save the baby. "You vicious brutes!" cried Aunt Sarah when she saw Lady and Tramp in the baby's room. "Get away from the baby!" Aunt Sarah called the dog catcher to come and take Tramp away. When Jim Deer and Darling came home that night, Lady helped Jim Deer find a dead rat. "Lady," said Jim Deer thankfully, "I think you and your friend were trying to save our baby from the rat." Meanwhile, Jock and Trusty went to find Tramp. They soon caught up with the dog catcher's wagon. Trusty began barking very loudly. So loudly, in fact, that he scared the horses. They reared up, and the wagon tipped over right onto poor Krusty. Trusty had a broken leg, but he would be just fine. Lady and Jim Deer arrived just in time to free Tramp. Jim Deer and Darling were so grateful to Tramp that they asked him to live with them always. By Christmas of that year, Lady and Tramp had 4 puppies, and the family's happiness was complete. Long ago, in a long-lost land, there lived a man of magic. He was known far and wide as the sorcerer. All the powers of the world were at his command: fire, water, wind, and earth. There was nothing he could not do. One day, a young lad named Mickey appeared at the door and begged to be taken on as the sorcerer's apprentice. "I have no time to teach you tricks," the sorcerer muttered as he searched impatiently for his magic hat. The sorcerer was about to send him away when Mickey whisked a red silk scarf off a table. Beneath it was the sorcerer's magic hat. "Is this what you are looking for?" Mickey asked. At that, the sorcerer realized that perhaps he could use a bright young apprentice. Mickey soon set to work sweeping and mopping. Sometimes he would sneak away from his chores and secretly watch the sorcerer at work. How he longed to be like the old man with his vast knowledge of spells. Late one night, the sorcerer removed his magic hat and placed it on the table. Then, as he went upstairs, he asked Mickey to do one last chore and fill the vat with water before he went to bed. As soon as the sorcerer was out of sight, Mickey picked up the magic hat and put it on just to see how it fit. Suddenly, Mickey felt a strange surge and knew that now he had magical powers too. Spotting his old broom, the sorcerer's apprentice took a deep breath and began to chant, "Dooma, dooma, brooma, brooma." Magically, the broom came to life, sprouting 2 arms of its own. Mickey motioned for the enchanted broom to pick up 2 buckets and follow him to the fountain in the courtyard. There, he directed the broom to fill the 2 buckets with water and carry them back to the vat. Since the vat was quite large, Mickey had the broom continue to fetch more water. Quite pleased with himself, Mickey settled back into the sorcerer's big chair to enjoy a few minutes of rest. He soon fell asleep to the soothing sound of water splashing into the vat. In his dream, Mickey slowly ascended to the top of a pinnacle. Above him was a starry sky, below a silken sea. With a flutter of his fingers, Mickey made the stars circle around his head like a crown of fire. Then he leaned over the water and drew the tides to him. The waves were lapping at his feet. Mickey awoke with a start waist high in water. The broom was still filling the vat with water. He watched in horror as the water came cascading over the rim. "Stop!" Mickey cried. "Halt!" But the broom neither heard nor heeded. In desperation, Mickey picked up an axe and broke the enchanted broom into many pieces. Mickey left the room and shut the door. But just then, each of the broom splinters began to come alive. Soon there was an army of marching brooms, each with 2 buckets. Mickey heard the noise and opened the door a crack to peek outside. A parade of brooms trampled right over him. As the brooms steadily poured more and more water into the vat, Mickey frantically bailed the water out through a nearby window. But it was no use. For every bucket he managed to bail out, each of the brooms poured in 2 more. Whirling and swirling, the water swept Mickey off his feet and carried him away. Then the sorcerer's book drifted by. Mickey scrambled aboard the big book as if it were a life raft and frantically started searching for a spell to undo the damage. Suddenly, a beam of white light pierced the darkness. Mickey looked up, and there on the stairs stood his master. Slowly, the sorcerer raised his arms. He murmured some words, thrust both arms straight out, and pointed his fingers at the terrible torrent. Instantly, the raging sea parted, and the waters began to recede. And when the last swirl of water had vanished, there Mickey stood, wet and shivering in a shallow puddle. As Mickey gazed up sheepishly, the sorcerer stared down at him with cold, angry eyes. Mickey took off the magic hat and returned it to its owner. Then, with downcast eyes, he rushed off to complete his chores. And so Mickey never even saw the sly little smile the sorcerer flashed as he picked up the once enchanted broom. But from then on, the sorcerer found a few minutes each day to teach his pupil the true uses of magic.